I grew up in a council estate, really violent, high drugs, high crime environment. I knew that I wanted to move into business. In the middle of a recession, you can pick a failed business up for almost nothing. How did we get to? 37 stores nationwide. I moved ahead, I sold that, and then what should I do next? I came across Trouva. We raised 40 million and we shipped to 50 countries globally as well. So it scaled quite a bit from when I joined. If everything went south, if it meant I had to stack shelves in Sainsbury's, I would happily do that because I grew up doing that. We go forward again.
Welcome to the Bay HQ, where we inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, make sure you leave us a 5-star review. Today we have with us Dimple Patel, who's a COO of Trouva and an exited founder from Love Koffee. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I've been really excited for this interview because you're somebody who's done so well, but you haven't really shared your story very much so far.
No, I've been very, very quiet. I'm not a person that kind of talks a lot about what I've done. And I think I've become more aware recently of how important that is.
And I think for so many people listening now, you're such a great role model in terms of how much scale you've achieved. And I think there's a lot of people out there who don't believe that they're capable of that kind of thing. But I want to get into your childhood first of all. And did you ever believe you'd get to where you are today from that?
I think in some ways, yes. And in many ways, absolutely not. I grew up in a council estate back in kind of late 80s, 90s. My world was so small. So everything that I'm doing now, I didn't even know existed. And the only thing that I did know, though, was that I needed to get out of where I was. So, in that respect, working super hard, I knew that I'd be working, I knew that I would be building towards something. But in terms of business, technology, I had no kind of, frame of reference that any of those worlds would even exist.
But with the council estate background, right? Because I wouldn't have expected that from where you got to today.
Yeah.
How did you, so obviously you went to university, you went into the corporate world after that, but how did you build up to that phase? Was it always something which you thought was realistic, or did people around you think, oh, you wouldn't be able to make it out and do what you've done today?
Yeah, a lot of it starts with my parents. So they moved here when they were very, very young, hadn't finished school, barely spoke the language, and bought a corner shop in a council estate and raised 3 girls in this really violent, high drugs, high crime environment. But what they did know was education was really important. So they pushed us quite hard on that. I went through school on scholarships. I absolutely loved reading. I was so curious about the world. I was, the annoying child that's always asking why. But I was also a little bit of a risk taker. I pushed boundaries. And I think all of those pieces kind of came together of, just riding that way through education. I was lucky enough to get to a great university. And to some degree, that is a little bit of a conveyor belt. Once you're on it, you work hard, you get the grades, you get the results. And at every stage, I was being introduced to a new world. So it's almost kind of like those boundaries are moving slightly further away with every step that I took. I still didn't have a clue how to navigate any of it. And I didn't have anybody that I could ask or go to for advice. But it was just always putting one step in front of the other. And my parents were hugely supportive of that, even though it pushed me into an environment that they weren't familiar with. That's kind of really got me through to the end of university before I was kind of thrown into the corporate world and realized again that I didn't have a clue how the world worked. And that was kind of quite a big reality shock. But I think particularly that phase growing up, it was just being super curious, asking questions, trying things, finding that they don't work, trying something else, and watching people as well. I'm actually naturally really introverted. Walking into a room with a crowd of new people actually still terrifies me. But what I found as an introvert is you learn so much from watching other people. That taught me so many valuable lessons growing up, but also in terms of what I do now as well. So I think all of that kind of came together and really shaped who I was, just as I kind of got to graduation and then really had to take another step up again after that.
After you graduated, sort of went into the corporate world, what made you go into those roles that you did? What was it motivated by? Was it you're really interested in that sort of thing? Was it more money driven? What was the idea there?
Really, honestly, not having a clue. So I did an economics degree, being surrounded by your friends at university, they're all going to an internship. So you're like, I don't know what one of those is, but I should probably apply for it. So you ask other people what they're doing. And there was an element of jumping on the bandwagon. And at the point, everybody was kind of doing accountancy, consulting or banking. So I was like, well, I'll choose some banking. I don't really know what a banker does, but let me go apply for it. And that's kind of what took me there. But at that point, I'd inherited my parents' mindset, in some ways, a bit of a scarcity mindset. You get a good job because it helps you pay your bills. It helps you provide for your family. It helps you buy a place. Now, banking obviously ticks all of those boxes, but it was never a case of do something that you love, do something that you're passionate about, do something that you're interested in. It was you have a degree in this that will be helpful for you to get that job, and that job will help you save up some money for the rest of your life. Obviously, application processes for places like Goldman are quite intense. Somehow fumbled my way through those. And, they clearly saw something underneath all of the black. I wasn't polished. I went into interviews and maybe just said what popped straight into my head. Maybe it was that. But just having the opportunity then to do the internships and to be able to show my work and just, again, work really hard, learn, contribute. And that was ultimately what got me the full-time role. And that kind of put me on that corporate path. And
did you enjoy your time there? Because obviously you did well, you were there for a long time. Were you enjoying that, or how did you actually feel about it?
Yeah, so I think that there was a little bit of a theme to my career where crisis kind of seemed to follow me around a little bit. So I joined banking in 2008. So right in between, really well timed, right in between Bear Stearns collapsing and Lehman Brothers collapsing. So the trading floor that I walked back onto versus where I had interned was a completely different place. There were massive redundancies happening. It was absolute chaos. The markets were going wild. And any semblance of training just went out of the window. So it was very much a case of, roll up your sleeves, get stuck in, start trading. I didn't even really know what I was doing at that point, but somebody trusted me with millions of dollars and told me to go. But actually, it just taught me so much in those early years. They're so formative in your career, dealing with pressure, working things out for yourself, problem solving. Obviously, there's all of the mechanics that I learned in my degree and the macro part. But I loved it. I loved having kind of that level of buzz. There was so much activity and judging the probabilities, trying to calculate the risk, trying to understand which way the market was going to go and the knock-on effect from one change to everything else. For me, it wasn't about kind of the P&L. I didn't walk off the trading floor at the end of the day and go, oof, I made millions there. I'm a star. But it was still a very, very male-dominated environment. And I think there's kind of a piece around the work that I was actually doing, but also the environment that I was in. And it was really aggressive. And
because obviously you said you were an introvert as well. So that's what I was going to ask you next. Is as an introvert in that kind of environment, which is so aggressive and so full on, how was that?
I think at times it made me quite an angry person.
Yeah.
You do what you need to survive in certain environments. I did have to really learn to stand up for myself. When people ask questions, whether it's because I was junior, whether it's because I was a woman, you never knew why they were questioning you, and just really push back in quite a forceful way. And I did. I eventually got into a rhythm of that. But it's really hard. And it's even harder when there aren't any female role models around you. There were no senior women traders, I think, on my entire floor. Wow. And so it's really difficult to look around and aspire to be where somebody else is. And I think eventually, once the markets had calmed down, the hours were obviously incredibly long, but there was less activity to fill those hours. Looking around thinking, well, this could be the next 10, 20 years of my career. But actually, could it? Because there's nobody around me that looks like me. And, I got married quite young, and I knew that I wanted to have a family one day. Where does that fit into this world? And actually, is it inevitable that I am going to have to walk out the door and start again? And I think those questions started quite early. And I asked the questions. I said, well, what will I do when I want to have a family? I can't just take a year off the trading floor, and that's going to be difficult for you because obviously the cost of that is quite high. How does this work? And, bearing in mind that this was 10, 15 years ago, the response that I got was the best part of doing what we do is that you're paid enough to pay somebody else to raise your children for you. And I think at that point it became pretty clear that either I paid somebody else to raise my children or I left. So it taught me a huge amount. I would not choose to have started my career anywhere else. And I think the culture that they create and, the quality of people that work there really does push you to be your best. But I think it just wasn't the long-term environment for me, and particularly for kind of the stage of life that I was in.
So it's interesting because you started your first business. Was Love Koffee your first business?
Yes.
And you started that on the side, right? When you were still at Goldman.
Yes.
So how did that come about? Where did the idea come from? What made you want to do that in the first place?
So until I got to Goldman, I had always had this kind of wired into me that if you work really, really hard, the results will come. It kind of works when you're a student. You prepare for your exams, you do well, you get your grades, etc. When I got to Goldman, it was this whole world of like, well, I can work really hard and I could do really well here. But when I look around me, I'm surrounded by people who are advancing based on other metrics. They're either really well connected or they network really well, or they're able to hold a conversation with somebody way better than I can hold a conversation with somebody. And I think at that point, it was a case of, I need to be a more rounded individual to be successful. I need to really put myself out in the world. I need to take a few knocks and I need to pick up all of these skills that I haven't had as I was growing up. The best way to do that is to build a business. Now, I'd always been a builder. I was, as a kid, going through the recycling, building shoes out of cardboard and things like that. It's just something that I've always enjoyed.
Was that from a money-making perspective as a kid, though, or just for fun, just to build stuff?
Just for fun. My parents couldn't afford fancy Lego sets.
Yeah.
But there was, living in a corner shop, loads and loads of cardboard boxes around. So, it's just that case of keeping
the creativity,
yourself up. Exactly. And I knew, building a business was a way of doing that. And the best way to learn is to just go and do it. It's quite interesting how the choice on Love Koffee came about as well. So I knew that I wanted to move into business. I knew that I needed to learn some kind of core business skills. So nothing around kind of fancy algorithms, etc. That was all happening at Goldman. But I really need to put myself out there. I needed a simple business model. I needed room to fail. And I needed something that was quite physical. I wanted to be out. I didn't want to be in my house building on the side. I really needed to put myself out there, but I didn't have a huge amount of money. So, I was very junior on the trading floor. Bonuses weren't a thing at all at that point. And I had no track record. I didn't have the contacts to go and get funding. Who was going to throw a bunch of money behind somebody like me? I was 23 years old. So, in the middle of a recession, there are a lot of businesses that have failed. And you can pick a failed business up for almost nothing. So that's the route that I decided to look at. And so all of that kind of came together in terms of kind of coffee shops, which were stores that another coffee chain had shut down. They're like, these stores don't work anymore. There's no way to make them profitable. We're just going to shut them down and leave them. And that kind of, it's like, well, that feels like an easy testing ground. If I can take those and if I can make them profitable and I can prove that they work, then that could be the starting point and the foundation to then build this out and grow it further. But obviously I had quite a, comfortable job at Goldman. So I hedged my bets and I decided to do both. I wouldn't recommend that particular constellation of banking and a second business to anybody.
I was just thinking, how would you run a coffee shop? Because you said in the person side, whilst also working on the trading floor, like you'd have to be in two places at once.
Yeah. So Saturday, Sunday, I would be on the shop floor. I'd get there at 7 a.m. I would be there with the staff, serving the customers, etc. And really got to know them. I built those relationships. We really built that team. I had never managed a person in my life. And I was hiring people twice my age. And I just went about it as, we're in this together. Look, we're trying to build something for the local community. We really over-indexed on the product and customer service. Those were kind of the two key pieces. And what I found over time was that built an ownership mindset in my staff that Monday to Friday, I could check in with them, but they ran it as if it was their own. Yeah. And that, I would say, is probably one of the most important lessons that I learned about kind of building teams and people and working together, is establishing that ownership mindset. And they did a fantastic job. You know, they were there Monday to Friday. I would always go in religiously every weekend. And over time, we built them back up. And it took us, I'd say, about 8 to 9 months to kind of reach that point of profitability. And then beyond that, it was just, okay, how can we grow this? What does expansion look like? I then got to a point where we secured 5 new sites, but they were with quite big landlords. So we're talking Westfield, London, those kind, you know, the kind of things where you need funding and you need to do it properly. So that's when I handed in my resignation at Goldman and decided to go in full time, raise some funds, and then just kind of took it from there.
Well, what's really interesting to me there is how, so you said you were 23.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine many people I know who are 20, like, I was actually from a corporate background as well.
Yeah.
How somebody would do the same job as me, then at the weekends run a coffee shop that they'd never run before, like didn't have a family background in coffee shops or anything like that. And did the people around you know about it? And maybe not in Goldman, but even your friends. How was it, like, the people around you, were they supportive? Did you get that, or like egging you on?
So I would say I had a small head start, in the sense that my parents had sold their corner shops and started moving into kind of coffee shops and that kind of thing in the north. They kind of got it, but it was more the sense of, you know, for them, Indian parents, you know, you got married, you got a good job, but, you know, you've got to have babies one day. And if you have babies, you have to be there for your babies. So do something to make sure that you are around. So I think that was kind of the way that my parents were approaching it. My friends thought I was absolutely crazy. They were like, you've got the golden ticket here. What are you doing? You know, you're a female trader on the Goldman Sachs trading floor and you're cleaning toilets and making coffees on the weekend. Like, honestly, like, do you know how many people will kill for what you have? And they just did not get it. They're like, what makes you think you can do this? What makes you think it's going to be successful? But I mean, I can just be really stubborn at times. Like, once I set my mind to something, it is just laser focus of, I am going to make this work and I'm going to make this happen. Now, the fact that I was still doing both meant that, you know, if the coffee thing didn't work out, I hadn't given up my job or anything. Like, I still had that as a safety net. But you just can't let that sway you. And I think to some degree, you know, that whole entrepreneurship, tech, VC piece hadn't even really kicked off at that point. So at that point, it was just really risky to go starting businesses in your early 20s. Like, what was that about? And it probably was, but I think I've always been a learner. I've always wanted to learn new things. And my time at Goldman had taught me so much. I mean, my learning curve was ridiculous. But then when that flattened off, it was like, okay, well, I need that learning from somewhere else. And even if this business fails, I haven't lost a huge amount of money because I didn't have much to put in to begin with. But I will have experience that I'm then able to apply to whatever I do next. And I think the whole way through, and I think even to some degree now, I focus so much on the things that I don't know or the things that I don't have. And I don't know if that's because when you're younger, you spend so much time going, I don't know how those people do what they do, or, you know, I have less than other people. And there's always been this kind of urge to catch up. Starting that business was always about the experience. Just knowing in the back of my head that, like, if everything went south, I had my education to fall back on, which was a lot more than my parents had. If it meant I had to stack shelves in Sainsbury's for a little while, I would happily do that because I grew up doing that. So I think a lot of my upbringing also just normalized what other people would call failure. Yeah. Because for me, it wasn't failure. It was a few steps backwards to where I came from. And then we go forward again. Yeah.
So your worst case scenario was actually something you've already done. So you were familiar with it, right? Yeah. A lot of people were scared of that worst case scenario because they'd never been in that world before. But you obviously then grew, like, the coffee shop chain like further and further, and eventually it got acquired. How is that process? Because, like I said, you're building it as your test business and then you scaled it, you were in Westfield, all this amazing stuff happening. Yeah. What made you then decide to sell it? Was there an offer coming in, or did you think, okay, I want to move on from this? How did that come about?
So how did we get to? 37 stores nationwide. So, there was a really good amount of growth. A lot of people don't know that there was a failed acquisition along the way. So that would have been the exit. And then the BHS situation happened and that spooked them and that fell through. I mean, it taught me a huge amount, but we'd reached a point where it had just become a rollout strategy. We had the blueprint for the business, the foundation was laid, the brand was growing. I had 2 children while I was doing that, but I wasn't as interested in just, templated rollouts. I wanted a problem to solve. So I think I'd got to a point where, I wanted to move on, try something new, do something a little bit different. And actually the private equity inquiry came in at just the right point. And it's almost like, the timing just aligned. It was the right thing to do. So kind of moved ahead, sold that. And then reached that point again of what should I do next? And that's where I came across Trouva.
Yeah. And for people who wouldn't imagine, so maybe they're starting their own business, but they wouldn't even imagine getting acquired one day like that. Was that, I guess because you're at Goldman, that was a bit more normalized. Working with private equity, was it quite intimidating because you had to, obviously, I wouldn't imagine if people are trying to put a price on what you're doing, you're trying to do the valuation and all those contracts, it must be a lot to deal with. But did Goldman, I guess, help you because you'd had that experience of that kind of environment? It's not the same, but at least some skin in the game,
Dealing with those personalities, I think it did. That's one way to put it. I think that definitely did help. I think what you need to remember, and it's very easy to get intimidated in these situations, is when you have built a business, you know that business better than anybody else knows your business. Now, somebody that comes in and asks questions, obviously more than welcome to do that. They're trying to understand your business. They're trying to put a number on it. And obviously that's where it can become quite an emotive conversation of, what that number should be. But as long as you kind of ground yourself in facts, you ground yourself in the numbers and try and extract the emotion from it. It's almost understanding it from their perspective because ultimately it's a negotiation. And the most successful way to approach a negotiation is really to put yourself in the other person's shoes and find out a way to make them feel like they've got an outcome that they wanted and guide the conversation to get there. And I think probably one of the things that helped me the most was just supplier relationships through building the business, negotiating with them, negotiating with landlords. Obviously, all of kind of the business knowledge that I had built into me still doesn't make it an easy process. So, acquisitions are hard. And I think so many people glamorize them because everything is just focused on the outcome. But the work that goes into it, the process that you are put through and all the ups and downs of them is really, really challenging. I think what helped at that point though, because I was so sure in my mind that it was the right time to leave, it wasn't a case of, there wasn't a doubt. There wasn't a case of, well, should I maybe hold out and somebody will just pay me just a little bit more? If I just, add another 5 stores or another 10 stores, will that change the narrative? And, it's a good exit. It was great. I mean, I was still, early 30s at the time, but really taught me a lot about what that process looks like.
Yeah, I like the point you made there as well about how I think whenever there's a big acquisition or something like that, it's the same skills you use, like you said, for landlord and for suppliers. So there's skills that people have right now are listening. Those stack up. So while it's scary doing something like that for the first time, like you said, you had the skills already there. And a lot of people listening will have the skills potentially to go through the same thing because everybody has to do it for the first time sometime if they're going to do an acquisition. And I really like that point you made there about how, because I think it's very relatable, a lot of people will be doing the smaller scale negotiations. Yeah. But that will then help you do the bigger scale stuff. Yeah. And then looking at Trouva, obviously. Yeah. So it's been in the news recently, some very good news you've had there. Yeah. But what made you get into it? Because obviously it was a very early startup. There's a lot of risk involved there. Well, for people who don't know, what does Trouva do, first of all? Yeah. And then why did you join?
Yeah, sure. So Trouva is a marketplace, so a tech marketplace for independent bricks and mortar businesses. So it's quite boutique-y. So it's very, very curated, beautiful products across homewares, lifestyle and fashion. We're now at the point where we're working with partners across kind of 13 European countries. We help these kind of family-owned businesses list their products. We manage everything from order placement through to logistics. And we ship to 50 countries globally as well. So it scaled quite a bit from when I joined. But in terms of what attracted me to it, so I guess Actually, a theme that has been fairly consistent from the coffee business through to this was it's all about supporting independent retail. So our differentiator with the coffee business was that we were independent, we were handmade, we were artisan, which is obviously, very in fashion now in coffee, but, we were very early on that trajectory. And Trouva did exactly that. So, whereas there we were fighting with the Costas and the Starbucks and the Neros, we have businesses here that are fighting with the high street giants, and they didn't have access to the online market. So we were giving them that additional sales channel. We were giving them access to an audience that they had no way of reaching because of the complexity involved. And I think for me, that was kind of, I guess, the more mission-driven aspect of it was to continue helping these businesses and really kind of adding color to retail. But it's also a fantastic product, and scaling a coffee business is really tough. It's really hands-on. The actual scaling aspect is long. It's quite manual. It's really intensive. And what became really clear, particularly with all of kind of the growth in technology, is how technology helps boost that scale and helps you achieve in 2 years, which in so many other industries could take 10 or 15. So I knew when I left, I wanted to move into technology. I just didn't know where, I didn't know what. And I'd say Trouva was a little bit of serendipity, to be honest. So I met one of the co-founders, just kind of asking him for a bit of advice in tech. And we got talking about Trouva, and one thing led to another. He was like, we're not hiring for a role, but you should come work with us. And I met them all. They were a fantastic team. I loved the energy. I loved what they were doing. Yes, it was risky, but I also knew that I would learn a huge amount again. So I think that element of risk felt like it had a reward, even if that reward wasn't financial or, when you join, you're not thinking in 5 years, I'm going to exit on X. But it's like this throws out a whole bunch of new challenges that I've never faced before. And also a group of people that that I haven't worked with for a very long time, So it was really about throwing myself back into that space and starting to build again, but in a completely different environment.
And your role there grew into the COO role, right? Yeah. And for people thinking about doing something like that themselves, maybe they don't want to found something themselves who want to join a business and help them scale and to do the operations side of things. What are some of the biggest challenges you faced while at Trouva, and how did you overcome them?
Well, when I look back over the last few years, we've faced COVID, where we had 800 shops all facing completely different lockdown restrictions, completely different situations with their families. And we had a situation where our business was effectively going to be shut down overnight because we couldn't access any of our stock. So it's like taking those boutiques and, working out, how do we keep our business open? How do we keep trading? And 5 minutes after we'd worked out that solution, actually the e-commerce boom happened from everyone working from home. So it's that situation of one day being like, oh my goodness, we're going to have to shut down, to the next day going, well, it's like Christmas because orders have gone through the roof, like the pace of scale. And also then the next year we faced Brexit, and, being an incredibly international cross-border business, building the technology to be able to continue facilitating everything that we do with all of the uncertainty that came with Brexit and the deal, etc. So I think one thing that I would say has probably classified my last 3 years at Trouva is a huge amount of uncertainty. It's made me think quite a lot about my trading floor days, to be honest.
Well, do you miss the trading floor days now?
No, but I've definitely drawn on them.
Yeah.
But I think the macro environment's been really difficult for everybody. And I think anybody that is running their own business right now, 2022 will not have been any different. And I think it's just made really clear that building businesses, your path is so non-linear. You don't know what's going to be coming up on a day-to-day basis. And I think the key that I found with Trouva was the team that I was doing it with were just incredible. And there was that real sense of kind of being in it together, everybody collaborating, everybody supporting each other. That really kind of, I was saying earlier about the importance of people and how different people work and watching them all come together to solve those problems. So I'd say that particularly at Trouva has been some of the key things that I've learned in my time there.
Trouva scaled massively, right? So you raised quite a significant amount of funding.
Yeah.
And then you went through quite an interesting acquisition process as well. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes. Trouva raised 40 million through the whole scaling process. COVID was really great for us. And then 2021, we kicked off an acquisition process. May 2022, we announced that we had sold the business to Made.com, which at the time, fantastic exit. The acquisition made so much sense. Strategically, we were really aligned. It was going to help us leapfrog quite a lot of growth as well. Obviously, Made had a massive customer reach as well. Obviously, that didn't go to plan. 4 months later, in a very, very public way, Made had collapsed. And I think when you think about the roller coaster that the team had been on and all of our boutiques, we've gone from this absolute high in May of we've been acquired, we have all of these growth plans, we're going to enter new markets like the US. 4 months later, being told to shut down because the group was insolvent, it had run out of money, potentially everybody was going to be out of their jobs. Making that call with the team was one of the hardest things that I have ever done to break that news. As a publicly listed company, things were hitting the newspapers before we were able to tell the team. And just that messaging of being like, the group is, it's closing down. I don't even know at this point what that means for you, your jobs, all of these family-owned businesses that we work with. And also being in those board meetings where you're being told that you can't trade anymore. And there's no playbook for this. Like, I'd never been in an administration scenario before, but also when it's, when our business is still healthy and it's still solvent, but the group isn't, I had no idea what to do. And I remember at that point just drawing on basic logic of, my business is sound, it's healthy, we have runway. So I'm just going to go into the board meeting and say no, and then see what happens. Which is exactly what we did, it's going in and saying, well, our business is great, so we're not going to shut down. We actually think since, you bought it 4 months ago, that there is value and that there is somebody else that may want to buy it going forward. And if you do end up in an administration scenario, if we're trading, we could be your most valuable asset. So help us find let us find a new home for this business. We'll manage the whole process. We'll do everything. Just give us the time to be able to do that. And thankfully they did. They believed in us, and we ran a full M&A process again, right over kind of the peak Christmas period last year, and completed the second sale in 6 months of the same company the afternoon of the 23rd of December. And we'd been given until the end of the year. So just made it.
So it's obviously such an incredible story, but I know it's so soon that you're not allowed to talk about it too much.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is get you on again in 6 months' time or something like that. And really dive into that in particular, because it's such an interesting story, but I just know you're obviously legally banned in different ways.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing your story today. And we're going to have to jump into quick fire questions now. First one is, can you tell us 3 British Asians who you'd love to shout out, who you think are doing incredible work that you think people should be paying attention to? I'm
going to start actually quite close to home. So my husband, Goldman Patel, he's obviously been with me through this whole journey and super supportive through the roller coaster. But he's doing some great work. So he runs Patisserie Valerie and Bacon and Baristas. So Patisserie Valerie, they took, again, another turnaround business. They took that out of administration. A huge amount of work that they're putting in there to grow that business. So some really, really great things happening there. The second, you've had Reese on the show. So I work with Reese as a venture partner for his fund. They're doing some really fantastic work in terms of diversity, really opening up opportunities to underrepresented founders as well. Great work. Definitely follow Concept Ventures. And then the third one is Nilesh Dosa. Now, Nilesh has an amazing story, but he runs a social enterprise called I Can, You Can Too. That works with young people who don't have access to kind of mentorship opportunities, and it helps them navigate that whole world of interviews and university and career path. Very focused on East London at the moment, but I've been working with them for a couple of years and they completely change these young people's lives. So yeah, some fantastic work happening there.
Yeah, I love to hear all their stories. And next question is, for people listening right now who might want to reach out for guidance, what could they reach out about?
Definitely navigating a business through a crisis. Any challenges around acquisition processes. A lot of the work that I do with new founders and new businesses is things like validating operating models, go-to-market strategy. I'm more than happy to talk about kind of early stage businesses, but I would say particularly building good teams and taking those teams through difficult situations. I'd love to help anybody who is facing those challenges.
And on the flip side, what's something you need help with right now?
I would love just interesting conversations with people about where they think the world of work is going, where they think, particularly within tech, but also other industries, like there's a lot of change happening at the moment. So I think I'm going back to having been through 2022, a lot of acquisition activity, just looking up into the world and understanding a little bit more about what is happening out there, what are some of the changes that we're seeing, and how might 5 years from now look. So anybody that is kind of in that space that's happy to share their experiences, I would love to hear about that.
So thank you so much again for coming on. Have you got any final words for the audience?
Anybody that is looking or unsure about starting a business, just dive in, just get going. The best way to learn or to validate something is just to give it a go. It always seems really daunting before you take the first step, but it teaches you so much about who you are as well. So just go for it.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for listening. It means a huge amount to us. And we don't think you realise how important you are. Because if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, if you leave us a 5-star review, it makes a world of difference. And if you believe in what we're trying to do here, to inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians, if you do those things, you can help us achieve that mission. And you can help us make a bigger impact. And by doing that, it means we can get bigger guests, we can host more events, we can do more for the community. So you can play a huge part. So thank you so much for supporting us.